Do you guys remember that one time when I overanalyzed the preschool show Peppa Pig and made the claim that the titular character lived in a cult society? Well, call me Athena P because Tinfoil Hat Aloe is back for round 2. Yes, another preschool show has piqued my interest and my mind cooked up a tasty theory. Real quick though, apparently Mummy Pig is pregnant with their 3rd child. I heard it's gonna be a girl. Congratulations, I guess. Welcome to the cult, kid. You'll love it here. You have no choice. So anyway, today we're talking about Pocoyo. Hello everyone, my name's Aloubell, and if you haven't heard of Pocoyo, I wouldn't be surprised. I feel like it's kind of obscure because no one talks about it. I mean, maybe they do. It aired back in 2005 and I didn't discover it until I was an adult, so maybe I just don't hang out in the same circles as those who do talk about it. The show is still airing, by the way, with 295 episodes and counting. The space in between seasons just gets kind of ridiculous. But regardless, Pocoyo, created by David Cantola, Luis Gallego, and Guillermo Garcia Carci, is a cute CGI show about a 4-year-old kid named Pocoyo who is learning as he experiences the world and how things work, along with learning how to be a better friend. There are some other colorful characters too, such as Ellie the pink elephant, Pato the duck, Sleepy Bird, Nina the little girl, Pocoyo's little sister Bee, whom I'm drawing here, and who just got introduced recently for the 5th season, and many other characters that complete the cast. I was gonna draw Nina, but Bee is just too cute. I mean, look at her. I only met her a few days ago, and she's like one of the cutest things I've ever seen. I had to draw her. Look at her. She's so cute. I can't. Anyway, it's important to note that Pocoyo, 97% of the time, takes place in a white void that has some other environmental factors added depending on what the plot needs. This white void is important. We will circle back to it later. The other important thing is that Pocoyo has a narrator, but not just any narrator, a narrator that can interact with the characters. That point alone should be sending up some flags for the Stanley Parable fans. This narrator is the base of my theory. For you see, his voice sounds suspiciously similar to the narrator's voice from the Stanley Parable.
Finger painting, getting messy and having fun. Oh, dear. Yes. It's all right, you two. It's just that I don't think poor Pato wants to finger paint either. You see, he just took a shower.
This is the story of a man named Stanley. Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee number 427. Employee number 427's job was simple. He sat at his desk in room 427 and he pushed buttons on a keyboard.
So of course I looked it up to see if it was the same voice actor. It's not, sadly, as Kevin Brighting voices the narrator from the Stanley Parable, and both Stephen Fry and Stephen Hughes voice the narrator from the English language version of Pocoyo. But since they sound close enough, an argument can be made that in-universe, it's the same guy, especially with the other evidence I'll be presenting. Before we get into said evidence, I'll also need to explain what the Stanley Parable even is, and I'm purely talking about the original version of the game and not the Ultra Deluxe, both for the sake of brevity and because I didn't see all the endings for Ultra Deluxe. And to be fair, Ultra Deluxe came out 9 years after the initial series, so yeah. Anyway, the Stanley Parable is a video game designed and written by developers Davey Wreden and William Pugh back in 2013. It's a first-person interactive choose-your-own-adventure game where you play as an office worker named Stanley who suddenly finds himself all alone in his office building and proceeds to make decisions on how to deal with this fact. The narrator is present to guide Stanley along, but given that it's a choose-your-own-adventure situation, you are allowed to not listen to the narrator and do your own thing. The narrator often gets exasperated with Stanley for not playing along, and even has pretty petty tendencies just to spite and torment Stanley. It's helpful to note that the narrator actually has more power than to simply just talk. He has some control over the environment, which suggests some reality warping powers. But even though the narrator has the abilities that he does, he doesn't have the power to control Stanley, which can get on his nerves sometimes. Interestingly, there is someone who controls Stanley, but we'll get to that later. Judging by how the narrator reacts to some of Stanley's decisions, it's safe to say that he's an insecure man who is a little bit of a control freak. He's willing to lord the power he has over others just to make sure that they know their place.
I have to say this, though. This version of events has been rather amusing. Watching you try to make sense of everything and take back the control wrested away from you, it's quite rich. I almost hate to see it go. You're only still playing instead of watching a cutscene because I want to watch you for every moment that you're powerless. To see you made humble. This is not a challenge, it's a tragedy. You wanted to control this world, that's fine. But I'm going to destroy it first, so you can't.
In one of the endings, and there are many endings, in one of the endings called the Zending and another called the Not Stanley ending, we come to find out that the narrator is a bit lonely and desperate for fun and happy things.
Here, yes. Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? If we just stay right here, right in this moment with this place, Stanley, I think I feel happy. I actually feel happy. No, wait. Where are you going? Oh, no. Stay away from those stairs. If you hurt yourself, if you die, the game will reset. We'll lose all of this. Please, no, Stanley, let me stay here. Don't take this from me. Can't go back to what I was before. If you die, we'll both go back. Why are you doing this? Stanley, let's go back to the other room. Can you do that for me?
Maybe he feels small and that he lacks any control in his life and uses his opportunity with Stanley to actually make something positive with someone who relies on him. So when Stanley doesn't cooperate, it's a bit of a trigger sometimes. I say sometimes because there are some decisions Stanley makes that piques the narrator's curiosity and he's willing to see how things end up, thus his desire for excitement. But when his loss is thrown into his face and things don't go his way, the narrator breaks down and lets it known just how sad and desperate he is. This dive into the narrator's psyche is kind of an interpretation of things rather than being 100% canon, but I don't think it's too far off from what was intended. So, how does this relate to Pocoyo? Well, one of the endings in the Stanley Parable, called the museum ending, gets kind of meta. Stanley goes off and does his own thing, much to the chagrin of the narrator. The narrator warns Stanley to not go into this one area because Stanley will surely die. After not listening to the narrator, Stanley ends up on a conveyor belt where he's about to be smashed to death. The narrator, feeling petty, mocks Stanley and his decision as the titular character prepares to meet his fate. But before he does, the machine curiously stops and a woman speaks as a new narrator.
"Farewell, Stanley," cried the narrator, as Stanley was led helplessly into the enormous metal jaws. In a single visceral instant, Stanley was obliterated as the machine crushed every bone in his body, killing him instantly.
Besides explaining that Stanley ultimately and predictably dies from being crushed, she seems to berate the original narrator for his pointless and pathetic power trip, as well as the fragility and ignorance of Stanley. She claims that the two of them hate each other and want to destroy the other, while simultaneously needing the other. While that in itself is interesting, one can't help but wonder, who is this woman talking to? She's not talking to Stanley, and she's not talking to the narrator. In fact, she's talking to the player, the one controlling Stanley. So the plot thickens. Is this fourth wall breaking? Or is the player also a character in the story? After all, in the Not Stanley ending, the original narrator also acknowledges the player controlling Stanley and directly speaks to them. So, what do we make of this? You'll see. I promise it'll all come together. Okay, just so that we can keep up with things, we have 4 characters: the original narrator, the meta woman narrator, Stanley, and the player. Something interesting about the museum ending is the setting. It's a completely white building with windows to the outside that also appears to be completely white. The only true color comes from a few environmental props added in. And just for context, the contents inside the building show a lot of the beta plans for the Stanley Parable, as well as some maps/layouts of the areas of the game's credits, and notes from the developers. For all intent and purposes, this is, presumably, the default appearance of Stanley's world. The simulation that Stanley is used to is stripped away, and what's left is the truth of Stanley's existence. He's just a character in a game, a test subject if you want to be truly cynical. Everything was planned out from the start. Interestingly, there's another ending of the game that places Stanley in another white environment, the Heaven ending. And, when you really think about it, outside of the windows in the office that Stanley works at, the outside always looks white.
Okay, so what? The world outside is completely white. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Stanley Parable and Pocoyo take place in the same world.
You're right. That alone isn't enough. But give me at least 3 similarities and my mind goes crazy with possibilities. Similarity number 1, the white environment. Similarity number 2, environmental props and landscapes can spawn into existence at the drop of a hat, including a blue sky if needed. Similarity number 3, there is a British narrator who can interact with the characters and who acts as an authority figure to guide said characters on screen. Similarity number 4, there is another entity that is unseen to the characters on screen besides the narrator, who is also able to interact with the characters. In the case of the Stanley Parable, this entity is the player and the meta-narrator woman. And in Pocoyo, there is a group of children who are prompted to help Pocoyo by talking to him, but they are not physically present, and thus one can assume that they are wherever the narrator is. Overall, it would appear in both franchises that the characters on screen are being observed by bodiless individuals who can both talk to them and influence their world. Similarity number 5. Stanley, despite dying a few times, is capable of being resurrected fully intact. There is a character in Pocoyo named Pato who is able to disconnect parts of his body and reconstruct himself. Stanley could be made out of whatever Pato is. Similarity number 6. Both worlds are able to be completely warped. You know, unless you interpret what's happening here as dimension hopping, that still works too. Similarity number 7. The characters on screen very rarely talk, and when they do, the narrator is often needed to translate so that us, the viewer, knows what's going on. Stanley doesn't speak at all, not with his actual voice. The 1 or 2 times he did, quote-unquote, speak, it was the narrator telling us what he said. Another character named Mariella popped up for one ending, and the narrator had to speak for her as well. Pocoyo has limited language and doesn't speak most of the time. Most of the time, he just gestures. His friend Nina speaks in gibberish, and also mostly just gestures. The rest of their friends are animals and are only able to make animal sounds, and thus it's up to the narrator to fill us and the other characters in to give some context. There might be more similarities, but this is what I've got just right off the bat. And thus, it's enough for my conspiracy theory making mind to do its thing. So let me paint a picture for you. Here's how I think things played out and how the Stanley Parable connects to Pocoyo. And keep in mind, this is mixed with some of my own headcanon to fill in some gaps. The narrator is a somewhat miserable and jaded man who works for some scientists or researchers. He's probably one himself, but is lower in the ranks. These researchers study life and simulations of life to better understand humans and creation in general. These simulations consist of creating very small, Polly Pocket-sized creatures who look like and mostly function like the bigger, real versions. Think in the same vein as the episode All the Little People from Adventure Time. The little versions of creatures, we'll call them the littles, perceive the world differently and aren't able to see or directly interact with the bigger people who are in control. The difference being in the Stanley Parable, the littles can hear the bigger people and can presumably talk back, but usually don't. One of the experiments that the narrator is in charge of is the Stanley Project, where he guides a willing participant, i.e. the player, into controlling one of the small humans named Stanley. What this particular experiment is testing is anyone's guess, but all I figure is that this gives the narrator his sought-after opportunity to finally make a difference at his job and finally be of some importance. He came into this with a plan and will not tolerate it being messed up. All he cares about is his happiness and success. When the simulation is turned off, or when the environment isn't completely loaded for the tiny creatures, everything is a blank canvas. Everything is white. This is the world of the littles. But when things are loaded in, the environment fills up with stuff. And when they want to add in some extra pizzazz, they are capable of adding a blue sky, grass, and other elements. But usually, things are white with whatever few things the scene calls for. So, the Stanley Project takes place. The narrator and participant initially have an agreement on what is to be done. The participant listens eagerly and follows instructions. Stanley goes through his planned out story. The narrator is pleased. But as the experiment goes on and the simulations repeat, the participant gets bored and tries to do their own thing with Stanley. This leads to the multiple endings and the narrator getting increasingly frustrated. And, in turn, the player gets frustrated from how spiteful and demeaning and demanding the narrator can be, even feeling pressured when the narrator begs and pleads for their compliance. It's just an awful situation that the player didn't sign up for. The narrator's supervisors are watching, and he doesn't want to look like a fool. There are some happy accidents that occur, but it's mostly one big mess that he's doomed to keep repeating. Poor Stanley is also getting the short end of the stick as he keeps having to replay his life and often his demise in terrible ways. Because he's not technically human and was manufactured in a lab, he has a reset feature that allows him to spring back to life fully intact. He's never allowed to make his own decisions, which has completely stunted his ability to speak. I honestly think he hates both the player and the narrator. I believe at some point, all of this will come to a head. During the museum ending, one of the narrator's supervisors, a woman, steps in and turns the simulation off because she can see what an unproductive situation this all is. The narrator never speaks to her because she puts him in his place and he's too afraid to speak up against her. The supervisor can tell the negative impact this experiment is having on all three individuals, but she mostly addresses the player, i.e., the participant. After all, the participant volunteered to help, and she wants to make sure that they don't have a bad experience. The supervisor even goes so far as to show the participant some of the behind-the-scenes decisions that went into this experiment, and to help them feel more included and important. She then tries to guide them along to a healthier and more productive choice. But the player, also frustrated by how they've been treated by the narrator, is still feeling pretty spiteful, so decides to bring Stanley to yet another death. Stanley, mind you, who also witnessed all of the meta stuff and is coming to the conclusion that he's just a tool in a sick game. The experiment yet still continues, but we do inevitably reach the final straw. The narrator continues to be bossy and berate the player until the player can't take it anymore. They leave the experiment and walk out of the building saying they'll never come back again. This is what we see in the Not Stanley ending. The player walks away and refuses to participate. When this happens, the narrator pleads for them to come back, but they don't listen. The narrator then resolves to continue the experiment without the player, so he pleads for Stanley to do something. But at this point, Stanley is done. He's so numb to everything and has gotten used to being used as a doll that he lost his sense of identity, so he doesn't move. He never moves ever again. This completely breaks the narrator as his desperation is heard through his voice. He never felt more alone and insignificant than in this moment. In wanting something, anything to happen, the narrator tries to encourage Stanley to make a choice on his own. It's fine. He's free to do so. He can make his own decisions. Stanley doing something is better than nothing. The narrator says he'll wait for Stanley to make a choice, but he never will. After this, the narrator willingly pulls himself away from the project as Stanley is taken away to who knows where since he's effectively broken. The narrator takes some time off of work to think about everything that happened. In his self-reflection, he realizes how unfulfilled his life is and how nothing really brings him joy. The experiment was a bust, and he ended up ruining Stanley's life and giving an innocent person an awful experience that very well might have traumatized them. Was all of this worth it? What was he even trying to accomplish? What is it that he wants to do? After some more self-reflection, he realizes that he wants to help people. That's why he's in the position he's in. Somewhere along the way, he gets inspired by preschool and kindergarten teachers. He sees how they inspire and teach children and become positive influences in their lives. He also notes how curious the young ones are and how they are encouraged to try new things and ask questions. This helps him to realize that people should have the right to make their own decisions and have the freedom and space to be able to grow. All of this should be guided by someone who is gentle, patient, and understanding. He also realizes that the littles should be treated with respect. They aren't tools or things. They are living creatures and deserve to be treated as such. The narrator eventually returns to work with revitalized motivation. He has an idea. Being super bold, he goes up to his supervisor and explains his plan. Seeing that he's changed for the better, she agrees. Thus begins the Pocoyo project. New littles are created. These are Pocoyo and his friends, who were all designed to be young children who are learning about the world for the first time. They too exist in this white void, but are given tools to explore and adventures to go on. This time, no one is in control. Pocoyo and his friends are free to choose what they want to do and free to develop their very own strong personalities as they discover things that they like and don't like. They learn about colors, music, math, reading, plants, and many other things while also having fun playing and relaxing when needed. The narrator speaks to Pocoyo and his friends. He has a much more friendly disposition and encourages the littles' personalities. He helps to teach them right from wrong and explains things to them that they don't understand. He reads to them and even plays games with them sometimes. And while Pocoyo and his friends can't officially see the narrator, they all have a really strong rapport with one another. With the littles being encouraged to naturally grow, they start to develop the ability to speak or use their vocal cords to some capacity. Pocoyo even learned how to speak the same language as the narrator, though his speech is a bit limited. Pocoyo and his friends are not always able to understand one another, given that some of them are animals, but the narrator is always there to happily translate. With technology, I guess. While the narrator has changed and is overall a much happier person, his controlling personality can come in from time to time, as in one instance when he insisted that Pocoyo and his friends follow his story that he's narrating, since they asked him to narrate a story and they'd play it out. When it became apparent that they eventually wanted to do their own thing, instead of blowing up about it, the narrator laughed it off and was just glad that they were all having fun. The narrator eventually realized that the lessons Pocoyo and his friends were learning could be helpful to other children. So, with permission from his supervisor, a group of real children, chaperoned by their parents, were allowed in to witness the simulation of the littles. The children would even sometimes help Pocoyo and his friends whenever they had a problem. This is evidenced by the sound of unseen kids shouting or replying when prompted by the narrator to interact with Pocoyo and company. It becomes a fun exchange for everyone. The narrator had finally found his purpose and finally feels fulfilled. He still holds some regret over what happened with Stanley and the first player. He vows to never let something like that happen again. He writes a letter to the first participant where he profusely apologizes and invites them to see his fruitful new project. If they never responded, well, he'd understand. And some part of him also hopes that one day, Stanley will have another chance to be himself. Well, what do you think of my theory? It's totally possible that the Stanley Parable and Pocoyo take place in the same universe, right? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and put the video game controller emoji there as well. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. It's free and will bring Stanley one step closer in his road to recovery. Special thanks to Filmora, Roundeleus, and my other patrons and channel members for being super awesome and supporting my channel. But as for now, that's all there is. There isn't any more.